Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll move on to district goals report, starting on approximately page 10.
So tonight we're presenting out on the last set of our district goals. We have our ACT goals and our AP goals, and here to present is Kylie Greger, Assistant Principal of Curriculum and Instruction.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much. I'm referring to the report that you have in front of you. I'm not gonna read through it blow by blow with you, but I have highlighted some talking points that I want to take you through specifically and explain some numbers, and then address any questions that you have. Looking first at the performance indicator for composite ACT, and we're looking at current and historical data. So we're focusing right now on the class of 2016. A composite ACT for that graduating class was 22.1. As you can see in the chart that directly follows it, tracking the EPAS growth for that class of 2016 from their Explore scores in 8th grade, where they came into us averaging a 16.60. We were looking at growing those students from Explore to the final ACT with accommodations, a total of 5.5 points. ACT's expected growth for students who have achieved Explore benchmarks on their college readiness scale is 5 points, so we were able to exceed what ACT suggests as growth, but we did not grow as much as ECRA predicted that we would grow. Their prediction for the class of 2016 was 22.55. And I highlighted that ECRA made that prediction based on the fact that historically that prediction has been something that we have hand calculated. Not me personally, but before I joined the team, Kristen was hand calculating that because we didn't have any other means of getting a projected score. So I wanted to make sure that the board was aware that this was ECRA's prediction, because it is based on the fact that it was ECRA's prediction, a more accurate measure. So they are able to more accurately delineate to the number better than we could if we were hand calculating it. So that's why we highlighted that ECRA made that prediction for us. And they use their local growth model to do that and get us that accurate prediction. If you look below to the second half of that page, in terms of the performance indicator for college readiness benchmarks, one thing that I did on this chart was to add in the column that reflects the state averages, because I think it's important to see where we are in stacking up with the state of Illinois as a whole. The college readiness benchmark total, that 21 number in the first row of that table, is not something that is reported by the state of Illinois, so that's why that figure isn't there. It is something that we have calculated for us through ECRA, but it's not something that the state reports, so that's why you can't see a comparison there. But what you can see categorically if you look at those numbers is that we are exceeding in college readiness benchmark where the state of Illinois is coming in. And that benchmark score is represented as the minimum score that's needed on an ACT subject area test to indicate a 50% chance of getting a B or better in the college level course that corresponds to that subject. I'm sorry, a C or higher in the corresponding course at that level. Also, we included under that performance indicator the EPAS growth for the class of 2016, and you can see that stacked up historically all the way back to 2013. But what you can see is, with the exception of science, which fell a little bit below that 5 points of expected growth that ACT reports, you can see that we are exceeding that typical growth. So we are taking our students from Explore to ACT further than ACT even projects that one would be able to do. It's important to note also, when we're talking about college readiness benchmarks, it's important to talk about where our students come to us, and I know that's a conversation that we've had before when I've been here. The class of 2016 came in as freshmen with 61.9% of the students meeting the Explore composite benchmark of a 16. So what that says to us is that when this class, the class of 2016, entered us, they were 61% roughly college ready. And so what that means to us is 61% of those students were hitting that minimum 16 benchmark. And then if those students all grew the 5 points, they would be hitting that 21 benchmark at the junior level. So then when we talk about benchmarking, it's important to note that we do have a significant portion of our population coming in who aren't college ready. So they need to be remediated in some ways to kind of bring them up to where they should have been coming in on their Explore benchmark, and then moving them toward the progression of meeting that 21, which is considered college ready at the junior level. If we look at the future predictions, on the second page of that district goals analysis report, although the class of 2017 has already taken their junior ACT, which these numbers come from, it's still considered a future prediction because the last score that a student takes is the score that is calculated and feeds into that graduating class composite score. Not their best score, but just the one that they take the very last time. So while that is an actual score, that 22.6 actual composite ACT for the current seniors during their junior year, that could fluctuate. We have lots of seniors who take some test prep during their senior year. We actually started some test prep today for a select group of our seniors who signed up for that. And so those scores can change even though they are their actual composite scores, because there is more that the students can do to improve that score before they leave high school, and it's that last score that matters for them. So you can see there where the students came in for the class of 2017 at a 16.78. That's an Explore benchmark, and then at the end of the junior year where they were as juniors. You can also take a look at the EPAS, kind of keeping in line with the format. The EPAS growth for that class of 2017 in all subject areas and on the composite exceeds the predicted growth that ACT expects to see from Explore to juniors, and the class of 2017 actually grew as a composite 5.82 points, so 0.82 higher than ACT would even predict. For the college readiness benchmarks for the class of 2017, that chart that has the green and the blue offsetting it, what you can see there is in the blue where the class of 2017 came to us as incoming freshmen. So as incoming freshmen, what percentage of that class was meeting the Explore benchmarks? And you can see the benchmarks are listed there after the content area. And then what you see is once those students got to their junior year, what percentage of those students was meeting the benchmark for the junior year. So all of those benchmarks, as you can see, are up 5 points because that's what ACT recommends and predicts that should happen between 8th grade and the junior year. So what you see is that certainly in some cases those numbers go down, it seems, a little bit in the junior year, and it's important to make sure that we think about the remediation factor that's involved. If, for example, 75.8% of the class of 2017 came in meeting a 13 on the English test, how then do 65% of them meet an 18 when they're leaving us in their junior year? And the simple math on that is that whenever a student needs to be remediated, and we talked about 30% of the class of 2017 and close to that of the 2017 class coming in needed that remediation. So not only are we trying to grow them up to the junior benchmark, in some cases we're trying to get them up to the 8th grade benchmark where they didn't meet coming in. We also know that a student who comes in meeting a 13 in English as an incoming freshman, a lot can happen between freshman year and junior year. When the rigor of the high school comes into play and the balancing of homework and activities and the plethora of things that go on just in a typical high school student's career, there are a lot of factors that can play into whether or not the path continuing on that benchmark is going to be a clear one. So there are a lot of factors that fall in there, and I think that's why it's important to have those benchmarks listed out there so that it's very clear that it's not that our students are regressing, it's that different students progress at different paces, and that has to be taken into consideration when you look at those two numbers, the percent meeting benchmark when they come in and then when they go out for the junior year. We also have on the third page of the goals analysis report some projections from the classes of 2018 and beyond. So you can see in the red the composite scores for the class of 2018 is projected at a 21.7, and for 2019 is projected at a 23.33. Again, all of their past historical performance on their assessments is what factors into that local growth model through ECRA and allows us to come up with that projection. And so because we're dealing with different cohorts of students, those numbers can often be very discrepant, and that's why it's important to look at that EPAS growth score, because it gives us the clearest sense of what we are actually doing with the students once we have them. You can also see on that same sheet some projections for the class of 2018 through 2020 in terms of what percentage meeting benchmarks those students are coming in. So whereas the class of 2018 came in with a 63.6 meeting benchmark, we have quite a significant jump in the class of 2020, and that just sort of highlights for us the different cohorts of students that we have coming to us at any particular point. In terms of what do we do with all this information, and how do we plan to continue to move forward? We, in addition to continuing our practices of aligning our courses and addressing Common Core goals and assessments, we are continuing the practice of identifying those students through ECRA who are not meeting benchmarks and offering them opportunities to engage in test prep provided by our teachers and to have another shot at that ACT and improve their scores so that their scores as a graduating class come in. We had 22 students do a practice ACT test with me this week to get a baseline for that test preparation, and then over the next 4 weeks we have teachers in each of the content area tests who will be working with the students to support their development in those skills, focusing on one content test at a time. So we have 22 students going through that process right now, and we had a little bit more than that last year engage in that process at the start. Not all of them stuck out through it, but the incentive that we offer is that if students come to all 8 sessions of the test prep that we offer, we reimburse them for the registration fee for either the October national test or the December national test to encourage them to improve upon their score. And I must say that the group of students that I met with on Monday to take that test are very, more so than last year, very focused and very determined and very eager to really get serious and improve those scores. Another addition to our plan to increase ACT is our teachers' access to ECRA, which is much more significant this year. Each teacher has access to the ECRA portal and can go in and drill down to specific students and specific performance on specific assessments and understand where students are coming in and how students are growing, and teachers can intervene on a more individualized basis with students whose skills may be lacking in any one particular area. So our teachers have more access to information about their students and more data than they have in the past. Kristen and I just recently ran a lunch and learn to invite all of the teachers in during their lunch and give them some more training about how to use that system and how to read the data and work with those numbers and how that data can translate into classroom instruction. That's something that we're also continuing to work with through our student growth aspect of our teacher appraisal process. So those are just a few of the plans that we have to increase in addition to some of what we have been doing in the past that we continue to do with streamlining our curriculum and incorporating ACT style skills into our curriculum as well as different questioning techniques to really prepare students for the kind of rigor and the kind of grit that a test of that nature takes.
Kylie, is the test prep assigned? How do kids find out about the test prep? Is it first come, first serve? Or do we look for students who maybe underachieve their projected ECRA score?
That's exactly right. We did a dive in ECRA to take a look at which students met benchmarks when they took their test their junior year. Any student that did not meet that 21 benchmark, we reached out to their families and to the students to let them know of this opportunity. And then students were free to sign up for that test prep based on that score.
These are seniors?
Yes, these are current seniors. So we had some parents opt their students in, but the majority was, students who heard about this opportunity through us and through their families and came of their own volition and signed up. We actually had a parent reach out today who found out that her daughter did not sign up for the test prep and wanted to know, even though it started today, I want my child to be in this test prep, can she come tomorrow? And of course, we would not turn anyone away. So even students at this point who know that they're not eligible because they have missed part of the prep for the refund on the back end are still interested in receiving that prep. And so we have some students that are taking advantage of that opportunity after the fact.
And since we're about 30%, we're 70% achieving college readiness as juniors, we're juniors. So we're talking roughly 130, 125 kids that are under benchmark.
Yeah.
And we had 32 sign up.
Yeah.
So is there something the board and I can do to help recruit more kids or help create more incentives or figure out how we can grow that number so that
I think we could certainly brainstorm ways to incentivize that. At the end of the day, an ACT test registration is about $35. So I'm sure that there is more that we can do if we sit around a table and brainstorm how we can incentivize that and make sure that the students understand the value in that opportunity to take that test over.
And we use Alcra to do a program evaluation on our test prep or just our school year prep? What's the name of our class?
Oh, just CAP, not
Just
the
CAP.
actual outside test prep, no.
The outside test prep for seniors is something that we started last year in an effort to help the students that maybe didn't perform as well as they would have liked their junior year. We didn't have anything for the seniors. So that's where we created that last year to help those seniors.
So we don't have enough baseline to say, hey, 3 years of history showed anybody that takes this class grew in point and a
Correct.
half, 2 points.
Other questions on that
So
piece?
he was talking about approximately 90 to 95 kids that, when he talked about
Didn't
recruiting.
opt in.
Didn't opt in, that.
Yeah, and so that's something that I think moving forward, this being only our second year too, I think in addition to looking at how we incentivize students, we can continue to look at and refine how we communicate with those students and how persistent we are with those students to make sure that they're taking advantage of that opportunity. That's certainly something we can look at doing.
How many of you, just roughly off the top of your head, how many of those seniors would you say have a study hall? Out of that 125? Can we look at that? Because
Yeah.
that might be something we want to do to say if you don't meet all your college, maybe first quarter you take a test prep, or we have some seniors that have 2 study halls, and that might be something
Sure.
where we could consider offering it, or consider about the board staffing a part-time teacher to offer test prep first quarter.
Can you, because we're on this subject, what about, do we only make this special treatment available for seniors? Because you show how you're measuring, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. So you already know after the 9th grade that somebody, actually, at the start of the 9th grade, but are we just waiting till they're seniors to give them these advantages, or do we have test prep opportunities for the freshmen, sophomore, and juniors who are also behind on their college readiness? It seems like if you did it every year, even if it ended up tailoring off, some people would improve.
Let me ask you one question. Do we track that 30% they came in not college ready and see what classes they're taking and work with them as a counselor? And does the counselor to actually sit down with them and say, no, you came in not ready, we need you to get these courses.
A lot of our students, I think this kind of will answer both.
Okay.
A lot of our students who fall in that 30% who are not college ready are students that filter into our extended algebra and our extended reading classes. So right off the bat, those are two pretty intensive supports that are put into place based on the scores. And that is the conversation that we have with students and with parents who want to opt their students out of those courses to kind of free up some room in their schedule. So that's the first line of defense. Often also, to kind of piggyback on that, many of the students, if not all of the students who take that extended algebra and extended reading have an academic support class. One of the things that we have been doing over the summer and into this year is revising and revamping and redesigning our academic support curriculum so that it more directly feeds into the skills that are supporting good academic growth in classes.
So what I'd like to see is a counselor stats that says these 30%, they visit the counselor X number of times during the year. And the counselor's been on their butt constantly.
Okay.
I'd like to see that stat.
Okay.
To see what, historically what we've done,
Mhm.
and it's trending. Secondly, why are we presenting something that shows only a 4.83 growth?
Which,
And you guys say ECRA. I mean, if we're gonna present something, we should own the data and say, this is what we believe our projections mean, not say ECRA's telling us it. If we don't believe it, then we shouldn't be publishing. From 21.7, from 1687 to 21.7 is only 4.83 growth. Isn't it?
what
Page are you on,
What
Gary?
page are you on?
It's up there.
It's the page right there. 2018, 21.7 to 1683, right?
Oh, okay, so you're
What's the
asking why,
difference? Yeah.
why is that, why is the 21.7 the projection?
Yeah, when we bump.
When it's only, when it's
we've
under
been
the
bumping
5
at
points.
6.5, when we had somebody coming in at 16.06,
Mhm.
and we groomed, so are we allowing ourselves to slip and say we don't have to grow anymore over above 5?
No, so.
Then we shouldn't be presenting this.
Why don't we
So,
let her explain? Hold on.
so what this means, the tricky part about this is that we can't compare the class of 2018 to the class of 2017 in terms
I'm
of
comparing
growth.
the class 2013, which came in at 16.06,
Mhm.
and we grew them 6.54.
Right. But if you look then, you're talking about a particular cohort of students there. And so we can't expect that we grew the class
We
of
grew
20.
it the best when they came in the lowest.
True. That isn't always going to be the case. It's not something that remains completely consistent, because if you look at 2015, they came in at 17.15 and we grew them 6.15, but 2016 came in
Right, I mean,
pretty
the elephant
significantly
in the
lower.
room is we don't want to talk about the feeder schools and what they're bringing in and how we can, and I know we've attempted to do it, but what we can control is the growth factor, and I've been harping this. We need to be consistent in our growth factor. We need to constantly show that we're trending up. And I
Sure.
understand you're gonna say, and ECRA's gonna tell us that when you come in at 15, you can't grow as much as when you come in at 17.
Mhm.
All right? But all I see is a pool of numbers. I don't see that there are 20 of those kids coming in that were tanked, that
Mhm.
caused it to be down to 16. I don't, versus another year when we're at 16 and there's 120 kids
Mhm.
that caused it to be at 16. I don't see that data. You guys see that data,
Right,
right?
Mhm.
But what we control is the growth factor.
right,
Because we're not controlling the feeder schools.
right, right.
All right? But if we're gonna allow ourselves to say, Akros is telling us we'll bump at 6 one year, we're gonna bump at 5 next year, that's telling me we have no control over our growth factors.
Well, what it's actually telling us when ECRA makes the projection is that based on the current class of students, so not based on theory and not based on what ACT says we should be able to do, but based on the current class of students and the data that feeds into their data profile, this is what we can expect as typical growth for those students.
And we know that coming in 8th grade, so what we need to do is to come in, get counselors on their butts, make sure that they're visiting, the kids gotta visit counselors 10 times a year, 10 times in their school year, to work with them, say, be consistent in what classes they're going through.
I mean, isn't it simple, this is a prediction as opposed to a goal?
Correct.
But-
And it's, I think the important thing too is that we always keep in mind that we are,
But we should know of, if you're gonna use Accurate, we
Sure.
should know what the weak points are.
and
But
And be wrong.
put the systems in place to, right.
But one thing we haven't shown the board, and we've shown the advisory council, and this is where Laura was saying we might need to start piecing this out to the board. We do know those 20 or 120 kids that are below benchmark.
Yes, we can.
And we do
can
have
list
them
by
slated
name.
in extended reading, extended math. So we're
Academic
re-
support.
Right, we're just showing the prediction here, but we have that broken out.
Yes.
And we have them in specific interventions to try to make up the numbers they're lacking, correct?
Yes, yes.
And I think that's what Ms. Ruska was saying when we showed her some of that information. We gotta find a way to keep this simple, so we could explain it in pieces to the board and to, Mr. Gritchen and other board members that we already know who the 30 lowest kids are in class of 2018
Yes.
and already kinda have their schedule picked out for them by the time they come here, correct?
Yes.
But-
I'd also like to go back to Tim's question in regards to the test prep. So in their sophomore year, we use ACRA to identify students that haven't met benchmarks or haven't grown as much as they should. And we place those students in CAP their junior year. And if those students want to get out of that course, they have to have a conversation with Kylie. And parent is called and they sign off on that as well, because we're stressing to the parent how important that is. Then also their junior year, they have an opportunity in addition to CAP, or if students felt they didn't need CAP because they are performing really well, to take a before-school test prep class, an after-school test prep class, or a Saturday test prep class, and those typically start in January to prepare for the ACT as well.
Thank
So
you.
let me ask you a question. I know we got this one out of 3 students coming in, not college ready. Are we going back to the feeder schools and saying, hey, let me just show you what a student needs to get to that 16 level? And are you incorporating that into your curriculum, or can we help you, show you ways to incorporate that curriculum? Are we doing that too?
Yeah, Kristen and I just recently met with District 96 to continue those conversations. We also have articulation that generally happens in the spring that actually happens at the teacher level. So we put all the teachers in a room together of, say, the English classes, and the teachers here can articulate, these are the skills, this is what we're seeing are the deficiencies when students come in, so that our feeder schools can then make adjustments. We've also worked specifically with District 96 also. They've adopted Carnegie Learning for their math curriculum. So we're working to vertically align what the feeder schools are doing so that it more closely aligns. We've started a big conversation, especially through our science department now as well. We've been shared the plan that the District 96 has with the science curriculum revamp. So that is definitely something that we are working on. I know it's a challenge when you're not a unit district, but the fact that we have just 3 schools is a very manageable number. So when we have our Institute Day in the spring, they're able to come over with us and articulate with all levels.
Are we getting the same type of participation from 94 and 95? Are we working with them also?
We are. I would say in terms of curriculum development, we're at different places in terms of adopting new curriculum, for example, in Carnegie Learning with 96. But what we are able to glean from our conversations with 96, we can then use that information to break into those conversations with our teachers and our students at Hauser and Kamarick as well, or at Gross and Kamarick as well.
I'll
District?
follow up to my 4.8 growth. I'm kind of concerned here. Historically, between explore and plan, if you go to 16, 15, 14, we're at 19, let's go to 15, 14, and 13. We want, at 15, they came in at 17.15. By 10th grade, they were at 19.9. 14, we're at 16.89, 19.8. 16.06, 19.1. I go down to 18 and 19, they came in at 16.87. They only grew to 17.48. Is that, what's going on?
That represents 1 year of growth, whereas the initial numbers on the first page is 8th grade Explore to
To
plan
10th
at the
grade,
10th grade, and then the 16.87, the class of 2018, 16.87 to 17.48 is just 1
Eighth
year.
to
One year,
ninth.
right.
So it's half as
So
long.
they took it a year earlier.
So they took it a year earlier, so their growth would be expected to be a little
So
bit
you're only
lower.
expecting to see, if we're trying to grow 5 to 6, we're not expecting to grow more than 1 in a year?
Well, we would
I
have to
think
grow.
you'd see, if you're gonna put those interventions in, coming from 8th grade to ninth
Mhm.
grade, wouldn't we expect to see kind of movement earlier on?
We could, but again, we're talking about our students that are in those interventions. Those are our most at-risk students. So, and we're talking about some of them with very significant deficits. So there's a lot more ground to be made up in those instances. We are seeing the growth take place, but there are reasons when a student needs remediated that they weren't able to meet the benchmark the first time, so it's safe to say that progressing toward the next benchmark, there could be bumps in that road, and that there could be some students who are at a little bit of a different pace because of whatever particular situation they're in that left them under benchmark in the first place.
The projection also gets recalculated every year based off of their new standardized test data. So that's why I believe last year the projection for the class of 2018 was a little higher, and then their practice ACT score came in, and so it was readjusted. So as we get more data on that class, it'll be readjusted as well.
I think there's another conversation we have to have too. We can strive to have our kids grow a certain number, 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, but we can't force them to grow. We can't force them to learn. We can provide them with all the resources in the world, but if they don't want to grow, we can't make them learn. So if our parents don't feel the tension that we feel here, and if our parents aren't saying, we want to learn and grow, they're not.
And the best way to assess growth is by looking at that 8th grade Explore, because that's an entrance exam. So students typically take that very seriously because they want to do well and place into courses. And then typically the ACT score that counts. Sometimes, depending on the student, they take practice ACT seriously, and sometimes they don't. And so that's where you see sometimes when you're talking about practice tests, sometimes you don't always see the growth that you expect to see because students don't always take those opportunities as seriously as they should be.
That 8th grade and that junior level is where the students have the most skin in the game, so to speak.
So I would think that if we were looking at that third that fell below the benchmark, are we looking at the whole family or demographic? Could that possibly be a demographic that says we're not intending to go to college? If I'm not intending to go to college, I really don't care.
Could be.
You know, so do we know what the values underlying their, what they're doing in high school may be?
What's the number that didn't go to college last year? It was like 15 or 20 kids out of the whole class,
I
right?
have that right here.
So I mean, it's, the numbers.
Just under 95, right?
Class of 2015, class of 2016, 58.4% four-year college and two-year technical, 36.8%.
See, I think that's lower. I think we've
It's
always had a
94 point
higher
something.
number go to a
So
four-year
5%.
It
So
is
like-
lower than.
Yeah, but
the
20
some
cost,
kids.
that's
20,
academics.
20 kids didn't go to some type of college.
Right. But there still is a decrease in seeking out a four-year. I mean, there is some kind of change, shift.
Okay.
4.2%.
The number of kids.
Oh, 15.
Yeah.
So 15 went directly into the employment force and 2 went into the military.
Right.
How many for vocational?
Vocational and junior college are the same, right?
Yeah.
36?
Yeah.
36%.
Yeah, 36%. So that was two-year tech trade or prep school was 130 students.
That's a lot. That's more than we've had in the past. I think if we were to look 3 years ago.
Class of 2015 was 101, and the class of 2014 was 109. So it's a significant increase from those 2 years. And the number, the percentage and the number of students who were seeking four-year colleges or entering into four-year colleges for the class of 2016 was down from the past 2 years as well. So we definitely have a change in some ways of where our students are going and what their focus is while they're here, what's important to them while they're here.
Well, there's been a lot of publicity about lots of people going to two-year colleges instead of
Yes.
4 years in the beginning to try to save costs. You know,
Yes.
College costs are out of control.
Mhm.
So there's, I think, other factors besides maybe their desire or their intelligence that's
Right.
coming into play.
And when you go to a two-year school and then with the intention of transferring your credits over, the ACT isn't what gets you into a two-year school.
Yeah, I think that's another thing we have to realize, that if you're going to a four-year college directly, you need a high ACT score for grant money or to get accepted. But if you have your associate's degree, your ACT test is not important. So
Right.
that makes a
Except-
big difference.
Except for one thing, it's not, some of the good students go to junior colleges, and if you go to Triton, and you're in the top 10% of the class here, you get free tuition. So people are going there partially to be economical. If they do well here, they're gonna be even a lot more economical at Triton. So I don't think that the fact they're going to for a lot of students, two-year college is a reason that they're not trying to do well while they're in high school.
Well, it's not necessarily, it's not something that we can say definitively one way or another. I think you're right. I think it is something that could make a potential, it's one of the variables that could make a potential impact there.
I have a couple questions, and I'm trying not to repeat, but I'm on the same page roughly as Gary, and you've heard it before. I feel like when we were saying ACT says 5 points, when our worst year, last year, was 5.5, makes it seem like we think that's a goal for us. You say it's not a goal, but we spent a lot of time talking about ACT's 5, and I have no doubt, based on your representation, that ECRA does a good job on individual analysis. They clearly don't do a very good job on composite analysis. They were way off in one direction for 1 year and way off in the other direction for the next year, and neither one of them really were within the range of what our growth has been. So my concern is we're relying on ECRA for composite scores, and we're relying on ACT to send some kind of message like that's, if we can do that, that's good, when it's not as good as what we've traditionally done. It's far from what we've traditionally done. And but that said, if you could, there's one area that I'd like to ask. If we look at 2016, I think it's still on page 12. One interesting thing in this one is, even though their growth was slower than the other 3 years, they had the largest increase in ACT scores between junior and senior year. Compared, the other 3 years, there was either no growth or 0.1 growth, and they had 0.3, which I think on the scale, 0.3 is kind of significant versus 0 or 1. Do we know if there's something that we did? Do we feel like some of these things you're talking about helped get our ACT composite score up for that particular class? Because that's a good sign that we're doing something specific for the growth.
I think that it speaks to the increased effort that we put behind the opportunities that we have for students to continue to grow, the opportunities that we offer outside of classes, as well as the enrollment in the CAP classes that we have here in the building. I think it definitely speaks to the effort that the content area teachers are putting in to make sure that they're asking questions that kind of get at the kind of thinking that is required on those high stakes exams, those critical thinking and critical analysis. So to your point, I think that does show that there was some growth that we hadn't finished growing there. And so there were some things that were put in place that allowed that group to continue growing more significantly than perhaps in past years. I want to address what you were saying with regards to the projections and the ECRA and kind of using that, what they're telling us as a goal. We certainly, when we hear from ACT that this is the growth that they recommend, the 5 points based on their analyses, we certainly always want to exceed that. I mean, if we could grow our students 10 points, we would certainly want to do that. And I think that it's important to note that while ECRA makes a prediction based on the way a particular cohort of students has performed in the past, There are a lot of factors that go into the actual analysis of that and allow us to say, okay, of our students who maybe didn't meet what that projection was, what is it? What is it? What's the breakdown there? And when we look at ECRA, we're able to drill down to that individual student data. With this current class, with the class that we reported on tonight with 2016, we had, I just want to make sure that my numbers are right, there were 70 students total that did not meet their projected growth. So, for example, Krista and I were just looking at this evening. There was a student who was projected to get a 33, and he got a 29. A student that was projected to get a 32, national merit qualifier, and got a 27. So 70 students didn't meet that projected. For whatever reason that might be, 21 of those 70 students were transfer students. So we already know that our transfer students, when they come to us, by the sheer fact that they're transfer students, puts them at risk a little bit because they haven't matriculated through our system. So we're able to look at and identify, what was it about that 33, that's that student who should have scored a 33 and they only scored a 29. Well, they may have been accepted to college already. There's different factors. So we do have a unique lens to be able to look kind of at that narrowed level and pick out those particular students and see what we're able to learn from that particular group. So once we kind of take out those students who are the real high flyers who, let's be honest, a student who was projected to get a 33 is probably in college, accepted to a college already, and if they get a 29, it's not gonna necessarily do much for them one way or another. They probably already have scholarships. But it does allow us to go in and look at those students who maybe were projected to get a 21 and got an 18. And so we can learn from that and say, okay, well, what was it? When we look at their schedules, when we look at their classes, when we look at what was going on in particular around their learning, what is it that we're able to pull from that so that we can continue to hit that high growth target? Because we do want year over year, even though it's a different cohort of students and we can't compare them to each other, we do want to continue to exceed growth, all the way across the line. We're never going to say, well, ECRA says that we can only get 4.7, so we're gonna be okay with that. It's about challenging ourselves to say, well, ECRA says that based on their past performance, they should grow 4.7, but how do we get them to grow more than that? And using that, what we're able to learn from that sort of deeper dive to inform the decisions that we make for those students and single them out, like Mr. Gritchen said, here are these 30 students that we need to intervene with. What do we do?
So what do we do so there's always been this talk about transfer students and, so what steps do the counselors go and meet with their transfer students and are monitoring that? And having one who's a transfer student, I can tell you. If we're gonna use the excuse that they're transfer students, then what are we doing?
Right now, we've actually ramped up our services for transfer students. Do you want to speak to that in terms
Sure.
of?
Every year we have student service interns, which are guidance counselor interns, so the equivalent of student teaching for guidance counselors. And so they're running a group with transfer students to help get them acclimated to the building and know all about the courses and courses that they should take. And then also our assistant dean is running a transfer group as well, because we found that traditionally a large population of our transfer students are students that will have some disciplinary infractions. So building a positive relationship with them as well. At the building level, we're looking at, we've been able to identify all of the transfer students by using ECRA and identify which students grew and met benchmarks and which ones didn't. And now we're in the process of looking at the ones that didn't first and collecting all of the information as to exactly when did they come to RB, what interventions did they take, did they have a study hall, were they in CAP, were they a special education student, did they have other factors, were they in honors courses, were they in regular courses, so that we can begin to identify, okay, some of our transfer students come in and they perform really well, and some of our transfer students come in, and a large a significant portion of our transfer students come in and they don't grow as much as they should. But we have to figure out, you know, what's the profile of the students that transfer and that don't perform as well as they should, and what's the profile of the student that does perform well, so that we can really begin to identify what additional intervention and support do we need, as opposed to just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. So that's where we are from a building level, but then we also have put in some more immediate interventions to try to do something to help the transfer students.
I'd just like to take an inventory of where we are in the report. We have 2 pages we haven't discussed yet, and there were some questions that were submitted prior to the board meeting. Have we addressed those?
I think there are a couple left on
ACT.
AP.
Okay. So is there anything before we move to AP?
I have one
Can-
more question.
Yeah, okay, after his question, I just.
You want to go
need make a
first?
comment.
On page 13, for the class of 27, you dice the data in a different way than the other. You show what the growth is by the content areas. And Ms. Greger, you said how we dropped a little, but, I mean, if we go from the bottom up, on science, we increased 5 percentage points. On reading, we increased 8 percentage points. On math, we increased about 3.5. We dropped over 11 percentage points in English, which I presume had a big effect on the composite going down. So can you tell us why, and what are we doing? We seem to be doing better in the math, reading, and science, and not very well in English, and addressing growth. So is there a reason that there was a big drop, and what are we doing specifically for English to address the growth that a lot less people students are doing well there?
One of the things the English department has been working on is incorporating more writing into their curriculum. When No Child Left Behind came out, and the focus was largely on reading and math, we continually got this feedback from colleges at the high school level. There was almost a call in education in general to really sort of abandon ship and focus mostly on reading. And so what has happened in the past few years is that English in general has been transitioning away from that sort of reading-only focus and integrating more writing. Our English department last year went through the process of adopting a common rubric across all grade levels based on the AP rubric that is used to grade AP essays and AP literature and language. And so through that process, what we're seeing is a lot more teachers integrating writing into their curriculums, as well as a more streamlined look at what are the expectations of that writing and how are we holding students accountable to that writing. And when you look at an ACT English test, even though the students aren't physically writing, it really is assessing their ability to write, because it's almost like grading a paper through a multiple choice. So I think that our work with standardizing the grading practices and making sure that that's streamlined and that all students are receiving similar feedback and are receiving similar guidelines with what is excellent writing, I think that is something that we're doing that will directly have an impact on that growth score in English.
Okay, thank you.
Laura has a question, and we'll
Yeah, I just,
move to
will
AP.
comment, a clarification, we keep saying ECRA says, but ECRA is the name of the company that you have contracted with. They've provided you with software and some mathematical formulas for you to do your assessments on the students and arrive at some predictions. So through those formulas, through those particular equations, these are your predictions. I think we need to be clear, because the entire night there's accuracy. It's not them. It's the numbers from our students that are going through these equations, and these are our predictions with a certain amount of probability.
But aren't these ECRA's equations and algorithms?
Right, we didn't have,
These are ECRA's algorithms.
Well, ECRA's not the only one that uses the same algorithms. And so I think we need to be clear that ECRA's not driving these results. These are algorithms that are used in education as a standard. And when we put in our numbers to assess our students, these are our results.
Right, based on our own data.
Based on our
own
numbers,
students.
right.
Yes.
Okay, on to AP. if we
Okay, When you look at, I'm not sure what page it is in your packet, it looks like it might be 16. So when you look at the AP data, I just want to highlight for 2016, that class, the percent of AP students who were passing an AP test was 72.8. That's an increase from our actual score in the previous year. Some highlights of really positive information that came out of our content reports is that our Calculus BC and our French language classes both had a 100% pass rate, so every single student who sat for those exams passed with a 3 or higher. Also, one thing that it continues to be a really positive story is that our AP macro and micro students continue to grow, and in those two classes we increased our students taking the class by 43 and 44, so more than an entire class of students, and we still were able to hold strong even introducing students who, and our AP macro and micro students are typically students who have not yet taken an AP course. So that's pretty significant that we're able to grow a class that is traditionally first-time AP takers and keep our pass rate very consistent. We have a lot of buy-in from our sophomores that take those courses, and they typically do very well. If you look at the pass rates by department, you're going to see largely a very positive growth story. There are some places where there was a slight dip. In science, we kind of maintained and stayed the same. But we do have some departments that increased quite significantly. Fine arts, science department maintained their score while adding a total of 78 students into AP science courses. Again, many of whom are taking those AP courses for the first time in the science classes. With the performance indicator for equity and excellence, we had a bit of a hiccup with College Board this year. College Board reported an equity and excellence number that was, as soon as we saw it, we knew inaccurate based on the number of our students who sat for an exam. So I have been working with College Board since we discovered that error when the reports were originally sent out, and we have not yet received a new calculation for them. So we hand calculated equity and excellence this year so that we could have an estimated figure. We're not sure, based on College Board's formulas, how they account for transfer students or when they pull the actual number of the graduating class for the total population. So that number is not one that is finite. It's something that could go up or it could go down once that research file with AP College Board is closed and they give us our actual recalculated number. But what we're seeing with the AP equity and excellence rate at 42.6 is that 42.6% of the class of 2016 took and passed an AP test at some point during their high school career. And this feeds back to the conversation that we had. 58% of this class indicated that they were attending a four-year college. And so for 58% of that graduating class, an AP test or passing an AP test could have granted them college credit. That typically tends to be why many students sit for that AP exam at the end of the year, because they're hopeful that a passing score is going to get them college credit. What we're seeing year over year is that as our number of students who are heading to four-year colleges dips a little bit, our AP equity and excellence dips a little bit. So where you see the highest percentage there in 2015 at 55.7, we had a much more significant number of students who were headed to four-year institutions. So this is another one of those numbers that can fluctuate based on plans for post-secondary options. And again, that's a number that as we get the report back from College Board, we'll be able to represent an accurate number rather than just our hand calculation of that AP equity and excellence number.
But Katie, we would be able to calculate how many of our students who take an AP class do not take the AP test. What percentage is that?
That percentage I don't have offhand, but I could get it.
I mean, we would certainly know that.
Yes.
And then it's a different percentage on how many of those actually pass with a 3-year higher.
Correct. I just was speaking to our instructional coach in social studies recently about a particular case last year where a student had gotten a scholarship to college, was one of the top students in our graduating class, and opted not to take the AP government test because it wasn't going to do anything for her. So essentially the heartache that goes into preparing for and sitting for an AP exam wasn't worth the dividend that it could pay. So that is absolutely something that we could get the numbers on.
So the AP students with the passing scores, that includes sophomores, freshmen, that includes all 4 classes?
At some point during their high school career, yes.
Okay.
So before we go to the plan to increase, were there answers to questions that were submitted?
That was with the
AP.
plan. The plan. So when we look at the plan that we have, one of the big things that we implemented at the end of last year was a continuous plan for professional development. AP tests change. Last year we had a significant change in the AP US History test and the AP European History test. As those tests changes, so changes the need for our teachers to be in service through summer institutes for AP. So one thing that we committed to as a district was reserving professional development money for AP teachers to attend an AP conference that we pay the full registration cost for on a 3-year rotating basis, so that we continually have our teachers being in service on best practices, any updates to the tests, and being able to collaborate with other teachers of their content from across the country and sometimes across the world. So that is definitely one thing that we have implemented to put in place to raise those scores. Also, we're looking at what preparation programs we're offering for first-time AP students, and what in the summer can we do to help students bridge that gap and make students more willing to take an AP class because they feel a little bit more prepared for that. In one of our instructional coaches' goal-setting meetings, we talked about looking at what percentage of our minority students are taking AP classes and doing a better job of encouraging and supporting our minority students to enroll, and that's a big push nationwide for equity and excellence and open access. But we continue to kind of battle and sort of straddle the line. As we increase enrollment, there's always the potential that with new enrollment and open access, that the scores could be discrepant because we are encouraging students where some schools do not. Regardless of your grades, regardless of your test scores, we want you to take an AP class. We want you to experience the rigor of an AP class, the rigor of a college level course. So it's a balancing act, maintaining open enrollment and getting more students in the seats. And with that comes some students who in other schools might not have been able to take an AP course because they wouldn't have been allowed in because they had to meet certain benchmarks to get there. So we continue to refine our plans there. We can't make projections on AP because there is not a test that comes before it that is like it, like in the ACT suite or the SAT suite. So we don't have a measure to say we predict that this particular cohort of students will, this percentage of them will get a 3 or higher, because we don't have those measures and because of the factors that we were just talking about. Some students opt out of those tests and some students don't take those tests as seriously as they might based on their plans. So we don't have a predictor there. The best that we can do is continue to examine the scores of the students as they go through their AP courses, and what is the profile of a passing AP student look like, and what supports and what partnering classes does that particular student have that might support their development in that class.
Anything over here?
Our families do know that they did pass the law that if you get a 3 or higher,
Yes.
and go to a state school, they have to
In
accept
Illinois,
those
yeah, that
grades.
was one of our plans for last year, was a big push to make sure that our families were aware, because that was, historically, that was a concern. I'm gonna go through all this effort and I'm gonna get a 3, and they may not even take it. So last year, that was part of our big kind of PR push to make sure that families knew that in Illinois, it's guaranteed.
Anything over here, gentlemen?
Is there a way we can just start in small pieces, in providing the board the information so they can see how the building administration is using the data from ECRA. When I hear the questions, it's not ECRA that takes the test for us. I know they're using a statistical model.
Mhm.
But, so they're saying, hey, the class should have scored a 22.6, they didn't, they underscored. What data are they providing you with to show us why?
Mhm.
And also maybe start showing the board how we're looking at some of our program evaluations from the data provided to ECRA,
Mhm. Yes, we can do that.
right? Because if they project a score for a kid, they're assuming that that kid's gonna take extended reading, extended math, and CAP, right? And so there should be some interventions that would help grow that student's EPAS growth. And in full circle, this could come around and then look at some of those programs to say that maybe it's the program that's not as effective. It's not the data, it's what we're doing with programming.
Mhm. Absolutely.
All that they're providing us with is different tools and different info for us to then go and examine and apply it to what we're doing here.
Right.
And so we gotta bridge the gap of what some of the board members are feeling about the data from ECRA and what we're actually doing with it.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we need to do it in small manageable pieces so the public can also understand. Okay?
Absolutely.
Let's think about those strategies going forward.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, very good presentation.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll move on to the,
Fruit flies. Kylie, on your way out, could you make sure the door's closed down there by the compactor?
I will, but I'm not leaving it.
Well, okay, when you do.
When I do though, I promise